June 28th, 2022 regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission.
State law establishes planning commissions. This planning commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representatives of the city's planning department, city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates.
If you're present at the meeting tonight and at one point wish to address the Planning Commission, when appropriate, please come forward to the lectern. When recognized, and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to the silent mode or turn it off. At this time, I'll ask the Planning Commission Recording Secretary, Kathy Zarnecki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Biegner?
Here.
Mr. Faison?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Here.
Ms. Parakis?
Here.
Mr. Rahman? Mr. Tagle?
Here.
Quorum present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next is to approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's proposed agenda? Mr. Tagle makes a motion. Mr. Faison seconds it. Ready for the roll call?
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the June 14th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Hudson makes the motion. Is there a second? Ms. Malala-Holly seconds it. Any discussion or amendments to the minutes? Seeing none, we're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Abstain?
Mr. Biegner?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next we have for public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to the commission for an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item of business, which is the City of Troy Master Plan, a master plan discussion on the Neighborhood Nodes Subcommittee discussion, and I believe Mr. Carlisle is going to kick things off for us.
Yes, thank you and good evening. So I have hopefully a pretty short presentation, and I hope that the members of the steering committee will jump in and kind of fill in some gaps and correct me if I misspeak and kind of lend some of their expertise to the process.
So reminder for the Planning Commission and those watching at home or in the audience, the members of the 4-person steering committee that was assembled to discuss neighborhood nodes are from starting with Chairman Lambert and going east. So it's Commissioner Lambert, Commissioner Parakis, Commissioner Krent, and Commissioner Faison. We're on the steering committee. So we will look to the 4 of you to jump in and actively participate in this meeting.
So first off, huge thanks to you 4. It was invaluable, the effort you put in, and really huge commitment, and I really appreciate your input. The group included, those 4 included 3 separate meetings, including a lot of work in between those meetings to get the draft in front of you tonight. The first meeting, the steering committee focused on the intent statement, kind of really get what is the vision and principles we want to develop these nodes under. In addition, they reviewed nodes A through I. The second meeting looked at the revised intent statement language and also reviewed nodes J through U. And the third meeting was the final revisions and review of the DeQuinder and Long Lake concept plans. So the first really 2 meetings, and especially the first meeting, we really took a step back and really wanted to talk about what we thought the key principles are for the nodes, because this would frame all the future discussions about what we're trying to achieve in each individual specific node if we had a common understanding of the principles that we were trying to achieve in the nodes. So the first principle was that neighborhood nodes are intended to be concentrated, commercial, and mixed-use centers situated at the major intersections of Troy thoroughfares. This is the existing language of the node and the node concept and hasn't changed. But nodes are go-to places that take on a social role, both serving as a place to meet basic needs of the community as well as 21st century village centers. Again, same language, or very similar language to what's in there now, but we add more to it to kind of make more clarity of that in moving forward. The third one is node development encourages a creative mix of open space and landscaping to provide an amenity to the residents, visual relief to passerbys, and a buffer to adjacent properties. This is new language. I mean, we really didn't have this kind of as a key principle that not only is it the built environment, but it's also the some of the soft environment that should be incorporated as part of the node development. 4, nodes are intended to serve the neighborhoods they abut. This was a big point that we've discussed in many of our meetings. I know Mr. Kren, I think, brings it up at every single time we have a node discussion. And so we really want to emphasize that they're really intended to serve and accommodate those neighborhoods that they abut. The intended uses include commercial, office, mixed use with residential component, open space, and pocket parks. Again, new language with the mixed use with residential component. We really emphasize that part of it to really de-emphasize residential and more emphasize the mixed use component. And first floor is intended to be commercial in nature. And residential uses shall only occupy no more than 10% of allowable building footprints. We spent a lot of time on that number, 10%, what was the appropriate number, what was less. We landed on 10%, really, again, to emphasize the intent is if there is going to be residential, they should be part of a mixed-use component and part of the overall design of the entire node, not just a specific standalone project. 3 stories may be permitted for mixed-use development, with the first floor being a commercial use and 2 upper stories of residential. If the Planning Commission members, we actually amended language recently that talks about 3rd story in only very limited locations in the node, and recognizing the need or the intent for mixed use. It was also recognized that it's very hard to do a mixed-use building in only 2 stories. And so there was some thought that in order to get mixed use, there should be an allowance for a 3rd story, provided that the 1st story of that 3-story is commercial oriented. When I say commercial, it could be office, it could be retail, it could be even some service uses, but again, intent is non-residential use on the 1st floor. And then lastly, multiple story buildings should be placed along the major thoroughfares and not adjacent to residential uses. So those are kind of the key principles of what we're trying to achieve and the kind of the vision that comes out in the nodes. Steering committee, is there anything I missed or anything you want to emphasize?
Well said. Thank you for condensing it down to those bullet points.
Okay.
Because we talked long and winded about the key ideas.
Anybody else?
The other thing I was going to mention too is we're not taking final action on this. There's a long process that we have to go through. So this is more or less an opportunity, especially for the commissioners who are not on the steering committee, to kind of ask questions, get some feedback from those of us who are on the steering committee, and kind of just an opportunity for some questions and answers. So,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
So I had a question on the 10% residential use limitation. I do remember we talked about a limitation there and spent a lot of time talking about it, but I didn't remember the 10% metric. So could you explain, Ben, because does that mean that the development of the node, only 10% of that can be residential?
Brent, correct me if your memory is better than mine. I believe that was the intent, was that really 10% of the entire node should be focused on residential. Now, again, the master plan is a policy document. Where this is actually going to come into a lot more play is when we actually have to amend the zoning ordinance to reflect some of these provisions. And so whether or not the zoning ordinance says 10% or not, well, that's something we can have a debate on. But the intent really was to make sure that the residential is a small accessory component to the entire node as a total.
I certainly do remember that conversation. So I ask about the proportion because, we also talked about it could be 3 stories if there was 1st story commercial. But that building footprint would be more than 10% residential, right? But
So remember, the 10% allowable building footprint is not the total square footage, it's really the footprint, which is like we would consider that the 1st story. So we're really only talking about 1st story buildings at the 10% at this part.
the 1st story. Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank you.
Now we can, and again, as the chairman alluded, this is simply a draft. It's open for review. There's a lot more steps in the public process for review. So if the 10% is something that we have concerns about, we can certainly have that conversation with the commission.
I wasn't focused on it being the 1st story, so that answers my question.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I remember the conversation. I remember the 10%. And then seeing it now tonight, it's making my brain spin a little bit. But we did talk about the 10%, for sure. I'm going to continue to kind of chew on this as the meeting goes on.
Ms. Malala Holly, and then Mr. Hudson. And
Thank you. I'm stepping to the area based on the CREE principles, Ben, that you presented. I'm stepping to the area where I need a little bit more clarification, so help me understand here. It says neighborhood nodes are intended to be, this is the proposed language of change, neighborhood nodes are intended to be commercial and mixed use. Down below, then, we say the nodes may permit mix of commercial, office, residential component. The intention is for the nodes to be having a mixed use, but it could definitely not have it also. Is that how we are trying to tell? Is that how I understand it? Am I correct in my understanding?
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. So the intent of them is for mixed use. There's not we're not going to make it a requirement that every single building is a mixed-use building in the node. So it can include other uses than just mixed use. But the overall intent of the node is they're really supposed to be a mixed use, whether that's vertical or horizontal, for the entire node.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then this if we were to codify 10% of allowable building footprint, will that kind of still encompass all the nodes that currently is now going to be considered as nodes? With the elimination of the nodes that is being proposed, but will that encompass? I mean, are we kind of the 10%? Will it satisfy our intention of redevelopment or for the development of the nodes?
I think it would be more in line with the intent of what we're trying to achieve than how the nodes are currently being developed. Most of the nodes being developed today so far have been residential and residential only. In discussions with the Planning Commission and hearing feedback from the neighbors, that was not always the vision and intent of what we were trying to achieve in the nodes. We were trying to achieve a much more mixed use and balanced land use approach. That hasn't been what we've seen so far from what we've been recently submitted. So I would say this is more in line with what the intent of what we're trying to achieve, not necessarily what have been achieved to this point.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
yeah, I think I remember from one of the meetings we had with the citizens at one of the nodes where I think the comment was, seems like you guys on Planning Commission only want to have apartments being built in Troy. And I think part of that comment got involved in this so that we could kind of encourage and incentivize developers to do something more than just the cookie cutter things that we're seeing now going on in the nodes. I think.
Can
Ms.
I just
Baracus,
jump in real quick, only because it goes with what they were saying. If you go, I'm sure you have already because it's in the packet, but when we go node by node, then it really, first we took some nodes out because we didn't feel like they should be under these key principles. But then there are other nodes where we said this the northwest corner might be appropriate, but not on this corner, depending on the natural features or the abutting neighborhoods or whatever it was. So it's a general concept and principle, but then when we went to each individual node, we were very specific about every single corner and what we're looking for there. So it does get more detailed, and this doesn't apply across the board, but it's open enough where the language that comes later fits within here, but it gives a little bit more direction that's more specific to each node.
Thank you, Ms. Baracus.
Mr. Hudson.
Under the key principles, the first floor is intended to be commercial in nature. Understand that. Residential above. Why would we make an exception for 10% on the first floor? Why? Doesn't make any sense to me if it's supposed to be commercial, and then we stick a 10% percentage in there of residential. Can anybody tell me why we did 10%?
So you're saying that because we're saying we want to put commercial on the first floor, then why not make it 0%?
Saying, we'll make an exception and get 10% to
Okay.
whatever resident wants to live down.
It could go to zero.
Pardon?
It could go to zero. It could go to zero.
Well, it could go to 10% too. I don't understand
Well,
why there's
because-
even an exception. of residential in the first floor.
Well, if there's a building, let's say if the node is big enough to have commercial lining the major mile roads, and then there's enough room behind that to put some residential to mirror that, then you could have a very small amount of
Well,
residential.
I guess I'm not satisfied but I understand now.
Okay.
Mr. Carlisle and Mr.
Well,
Tagle.
go- Mr. Tagle
Mr.
first.
Tagle, go ahead.
When I first read that, I was wondering, okay, if we have residential on floors 2 and 3, what could we put on the first floor? I didn't think of it as a living unit, but I thought of it more of a common space. Could be a meeting room or a community room for the residents that live in the building, or something along the lines that instead of not having anything at all, it might give them an opportunity to have a place to go for a bigger venue, a family event, something like that. So that may fit into that a little bit differently than thinking about, hey, we're going to put 3 residential units on the first floor. This is going to take up a 10% area of.
So we're allowing for that, but if the builder says, I don't want anybody on the first floor who's the residents, we're going to fill that. But I'd be surprised at letting them have common open space in a commercial building.
Well, that's where opportunities for asking these questions, so,
Well,
yes, Marakis?
to Mr. Tagle's point, I thought that, I mean, it's not, the specific language isn't up right here, but I thought we said the only way you can do 3 floors in a node is if the first floor is commercial. So a common space that's for the people who live in the building wouldn't qualify as commercial. So it really is intended to be for the entire neighborhoods that surround to be able to come and use it, whether it's service, retail, whatever, commercial, or office, I guess. But that's the only way that they can get that 3rd floor in a node. Otherwise, it's 2 floors.
Okay?
Can I add?
But first, I want to make sure.
Brent had something.
Brent, go ahead.
So if
Oh, it does say.
the first paragraph, for the first bullet point, first floor is intended to be commercial in nature for those buildings that front on the major thoroughfare. That's probably what that should say. Because the intent, like you said, was we allow 3 stories, first floor commercial or office, and above the next 2 stories above that could be residential, totaling 3 stories. And then underneath, residential uses should only occupy no more than 10% of allowable building footprints in mixed-use buildings. And then the final point at the bottom, I think what this should say is something to the effect that 3-story buildings are permitted to be placed along major thoroughfares, provided it's a mixed-use building. But I think we're okay with, it says multiple story buildings should be placed along major thoroughfares and not adjacent to residential uses. But I don't think we had an issue with like a 1.5-story building or 2 stories behind. It was the 3 stories that we had an issue with, not 2 stories, if I recall
I
correctly.
believe you're correct. Yeah. Does that sound right?
Because that would be the same height as the single-family homes are permitted to go behind, that would buffer them.
Yes. Ms. Malal-Howie again, and then Mr. Tagle.
Thank you, Mr. Savidant. I think I got my clarifications through his
Okay.
statements.
All right. Mr. Tagle.
Was there any discussion, again, getting back to the residential on the first floor, would that preclude parking? Like if you're parking under the building and live in the unit or units above?
My opinion, just what I interpreted from the steering committee was no, that parking, it would have to be a full commercial or other use
So
first
it
floor.
does preclude covered parking in a mixed-use building?
Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that was the point. So it would really preclude townhomes where they put the garage on the first floor and then build above and go up 3 stories. That was sort of what we were thinking about when we made that rule. Definitely no parking as a first floor. So no garages in the node on the major street.
Yes. Mr. Savinant.
Can I add to that? Yeah, so We did the neighborhood node walk and talks where we had a lot of residents show up, as well as a lot, really good participation from planning commission members. Then we visited sites with city council and got their feedback. So we've heard from planning commission members, city council members, and residents. And we also heard at a lot of meetings, you know, when we were considering applications for neighborhood node developments. And a consistent theme we heard, and steering committee, feel free to jump in, but we talked about this, was a lot of the feedback we heard from people was, for some of these projects like townhome projects, it doesn't benefit the residents at all. Like it's almost like these projects are airlifted in and dropped in, and there's no benefit whatsoever. It's almost like they're intruding on the neighborhood because they don't do anything for the surrounding neighborhoods. And so, per your point, I understand the need for covered parking and the desire for it, but that would basically be a 3-story residential building with covered parking and nothing for the residents. I mean, I understand why covered parking is important, but I agree. I think the intent is to have destinations for people in the neighborhoods to walk to, and I don't think covered parking achieves that.
Well, if I could follow up on that, if you get parking off the site, if you get site parking out, there's opportunity for amenities which the neighborhood could use. If you push all of your parking onto surface parking, you're using up the site for surface parking, and that certainly won't serve any of the adjacent neighbors, as opposed to a park-like setting, you know, by reducing this on-site parking.
I would agree. That is something that I would want us to reconsider, because I'm looking at current townhomes. I'm just going to use them as an example, although that's not what we want to build more of in Troy. I understand that. But if you take away the covered parking, then you're talking about extra space for parking to create amenities. And do we have that kind of examples where we are seeing more and more of these developers coming through telling us first floor they would like to do this or that in that area, although we encourage them to do it, but a yoga studio, an art studio, a gym class, things that I would like to see in a mixed use. My conception of a mixed use that I have seen around towns, other towns, mostly they will use that space for residences for the residences that are above, but also as a place where others can come in. I don't see why a coffee shop is not a good idea, or I don't see why an art studio is not a good idea, or a yoga studio is not a good idea, where the residences can also use that.
That's totally the idea of what these are supposed to be. The first floor is intended to be a coffee shop, a yoga shop, or whatever, or it could be an insurance office, or it could be, so that first floor is that non-residential space, still can be used by the residents, but it's intended to be commercial or other use, and then above it is the residential.
So it's not strictly for the residences then? It's open, it's a commercial for, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but then surface parking will be an issue with some from multiple housing point of view. The surface parking will be an issue if we don't provide ground floor parking for them. I don't know how that's going to pan out with more surface parking spots that they will have to create for the residences.
I've seen a lot of mixed-use projects that have just surface parking. And a lot of it is because of the time of when the residents are there, the offices are closed and vice versa. There's a lot of shared parking issues. But yes, I've seen residential or mixed use with just surface parking. It's not as uncommon as you may think.
So isn't garage an incentive for families because it could act as a storage area too for some of their equipment or playthings for the kids?
I think the thing to think about, and I think the graphics that we're going to present here may give you a little better sense of what the vision is that we have to be realistic that not every housing option and every single development can serve every single population need. So if your family needs a garage, then maybe mixed-use building where you're on the second, third floor isn't the appropriate place for you to be. But that being said, there are adjacent ones where there are going to be a mix of different types of housing products that would accommodate different various families. So I will show these kind of moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Parakis.
I just want to add to help sort of give a better illustration maybe is that, we're not talking about housing in Troy. We're talking specifically about the nodes, which are supposed to be these pulsing centers. So, families with children and needs for a garage per se, we're not trying to move in entire families into the node. It's to offer a different type of housing for young people who come in before they start their families, people who work, and haven't yet gotten to that point and want more of an urban feel that we've been feeling based on survey feedback as well. It's one of the missing housing types that don't exist. So that's filling that need. So as Mr. Carlisle said as well, if, we don't want to see garages in the nodes. We'd like to see the service areas, restaurants, coffee shops, exactly what you were saying, and then people who want more of that urban feel and want to live in a busier area would live on top. And then, as you remember, the nodes, they have to build right up against the street, so the parking would be behind anyway. So there would be plenty of parking, or there would have to be plenty of parking. And it's not going to be a huge parking lot, because when you're building on top and you're doing 2 stories, you're limited to how many people can move in. So we're not talking about hundreds of people, we're talking about a handful of people.
I know that one of the features we were talking about in our steering committee was, and this is what I think where it came from, was Mr. Carlisle showed us obviously you can't compare the city of Troy with Saline Township, but showed us a housing development in Saline that had commercial on the first floor and then residential, I guess, on the 2 floors above. You told us about approximately how much those units were renting for. Do you happen to recall what it was?
I'm a little embarrassed to say what the units above the commercial were renting for $4,000 plus a month, and so they were very high-end unit. But it was a true mixed use. The first floor, they've got a juice shop, they've got a coffee shop, and they've got a pizza shop and a veterinarian, and then they've got a bunch of apartments above it that are renting out for very, very high prices. And it is a suburban strip corridor. It could fit in Troy too. So, Mr. Chairman, if you may, I may go to the graphics, and then that may help kind of, maybe a little bit difficult to see on this big screen. But the first thing I want to highlight is the corner is this red, yellow, and green concept. So the red is the commercial front that fronts on the thoroughfares itself. The yellow is the portion that is in the rear, adjacent to the commercial and also adjacent to the single family. And then the green is supposed to represent the single family. And this is really supposed to it's almost like a heat map. And it's supposed to signify the transition of intensity. So the red is much more intense, fronting on the thoroughfare. The yellow is a transition a little bit less intense to the green, which is single family, which is the least intense. So again, it's this kind of building up this intensity as we move closer and closer to the corridor, and we're trying to visually portray that in all the node features. So the first bullet point here is multiple story mixed use. With first floor retail serving the adjacent neighborhood, and again, there's 2 floors of residential above. So again, those are fronting on DeQuinder and fronting here on Long Lake there. So again, 30 stories on the corridor, mixed use to kind of frame the street. The second bullet point is low-scale multifamily development would serve as a transition. So again, this is behind the commercial portion, and it's more of a 2-story, smaller scale, single-family attached product. And these were modeled after the development that we all seem to like at John R. and Waddles. Again, I'll talk a little more about this, but these are actually basically the same development that fits into these 2 corners. And again, also want to highlight under bullet point 5, multiple rows of landscape buffer to, again, serve as another true transition and a buffer between the adjacent developments. So number 4 represents infill. So taking a underutilized site, I'm sorry, this talks about parking. So again, parking again in the rear of the site, kind of screened and hidden from the front corridor, accessible from the corridor, but again, hidden in behind the buildings themselves. 5, again, just want to highlight the multiple rows of landscape buffer between the uses. Sixth bullet point highlights the different cross points of access. Again, this site has multiple points of access, both directly from the thoroughfare as well from adjacent sites to get back into these multiple sites. So you have multiple points of access with cross access for all the developments. And then we talk a lot about the street frontage, that there has to be that pedestrian amenity and that quality of that, how we call it the third space, the space in between the back of the curb and the front of the building. It's inviting, it's very pedestrian friendly, it creates a safe walkable environment for pedestrians, landscaping, benches, streetscape, et cetera. So we want to emphasize that's a very important part of the nodes as well. So this concept is a more detailed view of this residential portion. Of this residential portion. This is just a much more detailed view of that. So again, the idea of the pulsing of intensity as you move away from the corridor. So one, you have much more intense commercial uses on the frontage here. You move to a much less intense kind of buffer use in between the single family again. The intensity of nodes, they move away from the corridor. This is to emphasize the kind of the type of development that we'd like to serve as that transition between the commercial and the single family. Curvilinear streets, shared driveways, recessed and side-loaded garage. So again, de-emphasize the building form here and the kind of the frontage on the street. Again, to make it a little more soft environment. A little bit higher in density than you get in single family, but not so intense that it's overwhelming, and it does serve as a good transition from the single family. All right, I'll stop here. Anything the steering committee wants to add to these graphics?
Before I call on Ms. Parakis, just mention for the 3 or 4 people that might be watching this on either cable TV or YouTube, this is not what we are proposing. This is an example of what we would potentially tell a developer, if you want to develop on this site, this is the kind of development we would like to see here. So this is not being proposed. So, Ms. Parakis.
Along those lines, just to point out, because I remember when I saw it for the first time, it wasn't entirely clear to me, but the white buildings, you know, where that's white, it signifies that those are existing buildings that are there that we can't change. Yep. So we're infilling and showing what we would do with the surrounding area that already exists.
Yeah, this example, all those white buildings are there. There's all the new buildings are actually taking vacant property right now. There's nothing on those current sites where the new buildings are.
Yeah, so we didn't, you know, destroy any property that really exists there. All those buildings are there, and this is how we would develop undeveloped property.
Yes, Mr. Tagle.
So I noticed that, and I appreciate the explanation of what the white buildings represent. Are we redefining the nodes in the sense that this node at this intersection may consist of a north and a south on the west side of, if my directions are correct, or whatever it is, and really not be what we used to envision as, here's a circle around this intersection, which was always a soft, you know, where were the boundaries anyways.
It's a good point. We actually have multiple design examples. One includes a 4-corner intersection. This one just happens to be two corners.
But my point is, the nodes will be redefined to better reflect what we can do, or what a developer can do, as opposed to kind of being out there saying, yeah, you're going to tear down all of
so
buildings.
to Ms. Praxis' point earlier, again, these are concepts, but within each specific node, we talk about what's potentially available on each corner of the intersection, and it does recognize some of the existing conditions on the nodes that we have to consider if any redevelopment happens. So we go into more specifics on each individual node on that.
Just to follow up with Mr. Tagle, the white buildings you see to the east of Dequindre, that's Sterling Heights. That's why 4 weren't addressed specifically here in this example.
Any other questions or comments on this part of the plan?
We actually intend to have these graphics in the master plan to point out these are the key principles we're trying to achieve in the nodes. Okay. The second node we looked at was Long Lake and John R. And Mr. Tagle, this is a 4-corner intersection recognizing, and this recognizes some of what's existing and also recognizes some new redevelopment. So the first thing is recognizing that there are potentially some nodes that may have some more residential than others. This is a mix of duplexes and 2 to 3 story mixed use and commercial. The duplexes are kind of behind, again, sort of that transition to single family, and then you've got the 2 to 3 story mixed use that, again, fronts right on the hard intersection. This includes a designation of a neighborhood park. This would be a way to incorporate a park serve as a park as a buffer between the residential and the commercial, and also talks about kind of interconnection between streets and access to the park. Number 5 really contemplates what you do with a very difficult property that's long and and not very deep, and what you can do with it. And this shows 2 to 3 story townhomes that, again, front on John R. and have the parking in the back. And there's other graphics that show that kind of how we've laid them out, so they're not like a soldier course around the road, and really do provide some softening along the road. And then 6 is a retail building right at the hard corner, and how you develop a retail building under the node where you've got all the parking behind, you've got the building at the hard corner there, and really kind of uses to frame the street. This is just a different view of that intersection. Again, looking at Long Lake and John R. there. That number 2 is that mixed-use building that I talked about. So again, first floor residential, second and third floor retail. I'm sorry, converse that. First floor retail, second and third floor residential. And then 5 are those townhomes where you can kind of tell here they're pulled back a little bit. They've got a little different of kind of, they vary in their frontage on John R, so they kind of soften up so it's not just a solid line all the way down John R. Just another view of the same intersection. Again, the park is there at the bottom.
Mr. Tate?
Yep.
One of the challenges that we've always had and discussed is how do the existing residential properties outside of the nodes connect to the nodes? The obvious way is by vehicle. And we've also, is there any way to connect them either on foot or, like, in this perfect example, there's a nice area for a park, you know, but what it means is going through somebody's property, or as you've dug into these nodes, have you come up with opportunities to connect the neighborhoods via bike paths or walking path, as opposed to having to get in the car and drive around the block?
Yeah, it's something we struggle with. Obviously, this one, you can see here where the number 4 is actually a road stub. And so we've just extended the road stub to connect it. We looked at potential connections, but like you said, you'd have to go through someone's yard. And so we'll utilize whatever opportunity we can if it exists, but I'm not sure we have the opportunity if the only way is to go through someone's private property.
And we did talk about that in the document, as well as trying to encourage pedestrian and bicycle access to these nodes, so.
Yeah, you'll see the number, we have some pathways and some other connections that are kind of internal, but again, they're newly created based on new development, not necessarily connecting to existing neighborhoods, so.
And once again, also to mention for people who might be watching, this is only a concept plan because there's some existing buildings at that northwest corner that we have no idea what might be happening there in the future, but if for some reason it became open and available to a developer, this might be something we would present and say, this is what we'd like to see here, so.
And I would encourage everyone, Planning Commission and the public, to look at these in a little more detail, because it's a lot more detailed than I can try to explain, and than it would be show up even on a screen like this. They're a lot more detail oriented. And the last graphic that we wanted to show was, we talked a lot about gateways and a sense of welcoming when you come to Troy versus you're entering Troy from another community, et cetera. One of the ideas we did was a kind of a concept of a gateway element when you enter. This one is focused mostly on South Boulevard, but it could be on DeQuinder or another road. First off is just increasing and improving the traffic signal and the street pole signage should be those should be consistent throughout the gateways and be more of a hardy material like an actual mast pole than other features. Simple things like street lights with pole banners on them saying "Welcome to Troy" or advertising an event or something of that nature. Street trees, landscaping in the right of way goes a long way to kind of create a sense of welcoming. better pedestrian delineation across these roads, marked crosswalks, pedestrian active signals, curb cuts, making sure that they're ADA compliant with regards to crossing, et cetera, just improving the pedestrian crossing experience. And then the last one is that kind of detailed graphic up in the corner. Having some sort of public art or signage at the intersections of a welcome to Troy, have a common welcome to Troy signage or something like that, or public art all the corners with landscaping. Again, showing you, delineating between Troy and some of the adjacent communities, just to have more welcome. So these are some ideas to incorporate as you improve your intersections.
Yes, Mr. Faison.
Could you go back to the previous illustration?
This one, or?
I think that one, but I think a previous picture. Yeah, that one. No. Yeah, this one is fine. So number 5 there, that's the townhomes?
The townhomes.
Yeah, and forgive me if we talked about this in the subcommittee and I don't remember. You know, one of the issues we've had currently is, you know, the current neighborhood node language encourages mixed use, but we're seeing mainly or almost totally residential. So in a scenario like this, could number 5 be built on a one-off basis, since that's all residential, or does it have to do the other? How do you control for that aspect of it going forward?
Are you talking about the issue about how we're talking about there has to be only 10% residential that we talked about earlier?
Or that, you know, we want the node to be more than just residential.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so it gets back to that question about do we consider uses on a specific parcel in the node, or we consider the node as a whole?
Correct.
If you look at this node as a whole, it's truly mixed use. I mean, you've got
Absolutely.
commercial on one corner, you've got mixed use on another corner, you've got residential on another corner. I think that's a question that, as a planning commission, we're going to have to consider. Is do we want to zone these sites that you can't have any project that's just residential? And I don't know if we know that answer yet. And I think it's something that we should discuss as a planning commission. Because you could zone these such that every site has to have a mixed use component, or you can't do residential unless it's part of a mixed use building. And I know that's kind of what we talked about a little bit in the intent statement. I don't know if that's applicable for every single node that we go along, because when we go into by node, there are some nodes that we call out for specific residential uses and some for others. And so I think that intent statement was just an intent statement for the nodes in general, but I think when you get down to the specifics, there are some specific nodes that we should consider that would allow standalone residential.
Yes, Ms. Malala-Holly.
Thank you. I just have a clarification to ask. Under design concept, and I'm on page 13 of the packet today, it says development may be denser and taller than the surrounding area, encouraging visual prominence. What is this in reference to?
So again, this is the idea that pulsing I talked about earlier. We've got more intensity up at the corridor, or on the thoroughfare, and then kind of less intensity as you go back. And so this is saying that development may be denser and taller than the surrounding area. So again, than the surrounding single family, to create that visual prominence as a gathering space. Because again, these are supposed to be kind of urban pulsing nodes with a little bit more intensity than some of the surrounding area. But again, it's got to be that transition from the corridor to the back to the residential.
Got it. Okay.
And we also said, we changed the word, it said will be before, and now we said maybe, so. Ms. Prakash.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's been an interesting conversation, especially with the members who weren't at our steering committee. On the first day, we started with the intent statement, and we were looking at a very broad, general way to capture what we were looking for in the nodes. And then we went through each node individually. But now coming back and hearing the questions, I certainly understand what everybody's thinking. And I do think that perhaps we should reconsider the way we've generalize the nodes, because if we do go through each of the nodes, there are, like this example, we're suggesting, I mean, we've created a suggestion that they put townhomes right on the, right in the middle of the node, right up to the intersection, which doesn't quite fit the general concept, and it's a little bit conflicting, honestly. Maybe we should keep it, but also add, make it more soft to say that, you know, this is the general idea for some of the nodes, and then add that some other nodes should look a little bit more residential. And I mean, I think it's needed to put something, because we don't want somebody to say, well, the specific node that you described doesn't match the intent. I don't want there to be a conflict there.
You're 100% correct. And when we get to the specific nodes, we actually do that. For example, one of our nodes, I'm just looking here, it says that there may be opportunities for limited infill retail development at the corner of this node. So we do specifically, in certain nodes, we do call out specific residential uses. We may need to update the intent statement to better describe that.
Yes.
I think is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I guess I want to make sure that the general intent statement doesn't conflict with our specifics, because we were very specific about corners, this in particular. And I don't want it to be confusing to a developer to be like, well, the intent is this, but now you're telling us this and it conflicts. So we should make sure that the intent statement encompasses every single detail that we specified within the nodes. I mean, not every single, but that allows for it at least.
And earlier on, Mr. Savidant mentioned a few more words that added more sense to those sentences that we were talking about, like adding the word thoroughfare. Can we also add those in to make it more clearer with our intention?
Yeah, I think Mr. Carlisle was writing those words down
Yeah.
after he heard Mr.
Those
Savitt
words
mention
really,
those.
yeah. Oh, thanks.
So just in conclusion, and I was not going to go through each node by node unless people wanted me to or had any specific questions, but the steering committee, we went literally every node by node and depicted. The first question we asked was, is this appropriate for a node designation in the first place? And if it wasn't, we suggested elimination. So there are 6 nodes that we are suggesting that we eliminate. These would go back to the most, the zoning designation that's most consistent with the surrounding area. So for example, the one at DeQuinder and 14 Mile is surrounded by industrial. Makes sense to go back to industrial zoning and future land use for that. The other 5 have a mix of different zoning adjacent to, et cetera. We'll probably treat those on a case-by-case basis. Most of them are going to go back to general business or commercial business, because that's what kind of the surrounding area is. But based on a sense of existing conditions, road conditions, so a lot of those on for example, on Long Lake and Rochester are major thoroughfares, 6-lane plus thoroughfares, just weren't conducive to kind of a neighborhood node concept. We just felt they're more appropriate to be eliminated and put them back into a zoning designation that made more sense. Steering committee, is there anything I missed on that concept?
That covered it.
Yes, Ms. Mulholland.
Sorry, I understand about the Rochester Long Lake and Rochester and Wattles. No issues there, but I was kind of surprised to see that you are intending on eliminating the Livernois Wattles area, that area, and Livernois Long Lake, although Livernois and Long Lake has, of course, more commercial presence as opposed to Livernois and Wattles. What was the rationale behind Livernois and Wattles being eliminated?
I think Livernois and Wattles, I think the primary thing we looked at that one intersection was the lack of ability to really make it into a true neighborhood node, because we had the existing residential and commercial on that site, made it more difficult for us to look at that really as a true neighborhood node. But I don't know if
The Troy Historical Center is on the north west side, and then the southwest side is a neighborhood. Those are going to be there. There's that party store as well, but that's the only thing that's there. And then on the other side, there are offices, I believe, and then I think there's the university on the on the southeast corner. So we felt that if all of a sudden For example, well, I don't want to give any example, but if all of a sudden the party store, let's say they wanted to redo something, they'd have to move it right up to the street, and it wouldn't really fit like that because of the Troy Historical Society right there, and or the village, But so that one we felt didn't fit with all the requirements, the transparency requirements, all those requirements of nodes, so we felt that it would be better to eliminate it, and then we can zone it the way it should be zoned.
And I think Livernois and Long Lake, we also looked at the traffic intensity at that corner and said it was probably not a conducive corner for pedestrian access, so that pretty much encapsulate our thoughts.
Well, just to piggyback on some of the busier nodes in the middle, if you remember during the neighborhood node walk and talks, going across, Mr. Hudson, you were part of that. When we between meetings, we went to the place for tea. How busy that intersection was, and it just wasn't a comfortable experience. A lot of times you had to get halfway, stop, wait for the light to change again, get halfway. And the width of the road and the boulevards, it just didn't seem like it felt right to keep those as neighborhood nodes. Was
Okay,
some of
thank
the
you.
thinking behind that.
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with road conditions too. It's just the speed of the road, the volume of the traffic with the building that close to the road just didn't feel appropriate, I think.
And also the fact that most of those nodes had at least one significant retail strip center with a massive parking lot in front that we felt really, they're successful, they're not going anywhere. So it's almost like it's a holding pattern, and we're not going to really accomplish much with all the things we just talked about. So
True, yeah, okay.
Mr. Beekner.
Mr. Carlo, Mr. Savant, you guys have decades doing this, and I mean, I'm looking at it from a big picture. Are we trying to tell potential developers the ideas of what we put in certain spots? I'm seeing homes, I'm seeing townhomes, I'm seeing duplexes, I'm seeing retail. If I'm a businessman, I'm going to make the most money on this one, that's what they're going to want to build. And then the least profitable ones, when they're not going to want to build. I mean, is this going to hamstring them? Is this going to give them great direction on what they want to do from a big picture? How do you see this panning out?
Well, probably I'll try to be concise here. I'm going to go back to Big Beaver, because Big Beaver is a form-based district similar to the neighborhood nodes, but when it first started to see investment, we had meetings internal where they weren't public meetings, but we met with investors and bankers and developers, because we weren't seeing the vertical mixed use investment along Big Beaver. And this is like 10 years ago, and we were told mixed use doesn't work. It's not going to work on Big Beaver, it doesn't work in suburban communities, it just doesn't work. And we heard all these reasons why it didn't work, but now we see mixed use applications on Big Beaver, and it apparently does work. So, and I think that same mentality, we seem to only get, in the nodes, we seem to only get the low-hanging fruit, like the townhomes, the 3-story townhomes, which again, don't lend themselves as great neighbors, is what we're hearing from people involved in the process. And there's a lack of creativity, and it's just the same old type development. And so I guess to answer your question, I'm not a developer, but I see opportunity, and I see if we go in this direction, I see the city's really forcing developers' hands to be more creative and to provide more than what they're providing. And I guess time will tell whether our approach is successful or not. I'm hoping that the development community, if we go forward with this, the development community grasps the opportunity and starts proposing projects that meet those principles that we're talking about. Because right now they're not. It's just the same old. It's the townhomes.
Thank you.
So it's an optimistic thumbs up. This is going to be effective.
Do
And
we have feedback from developers?
not
yet.
not yet.
I'll be very curious.
Not yet. But again, mixed use wasn't heard of Then we had a developer from Florida purchase the 888 Big Beaver building over my shoulder here, other side of 75, and that's mixed use. That's all these best management practices like at grade retail with parking decks above, and an apartment building attached to a parking deck. These are things that we were told doesn't work, and he's thriving over there.
Mr. Tagle.
I'd just like to add, we've had this conversation before, and we look at other communities that are attractive to young families, and these principles work. And it's why do they work in other communities and can't work here? And I think it really falls to the level of the developer. I mean, if it ain't broke, why try to fix it? But on the other hand, we see as Brent was saying, we've seen opportunity in other communities grow and attract. We're talking about being destination places, trying to do things that the up and coming generations are going to want to have and be attracted to. So I think the direction this is going in is going to be very positive, but it is going to take a developer to look at it differently than maybe they've looked at it for years and years and years.
Mr. Carlisle, do you have anything more to present to us?
Very brief.
Oh, no problem. Take your time.
One slide.
Sorry.
A lot of boxes. And then lastly, as I said, again, we went through node by node and actually edited all the language for each of the individual nodes, and I can't count how many there are up there, 15, 16. We are recommending they remain as nodes, but we revised the language for each one with regards to what we envision for the future of those nodes. And we get pretty specific. We actually talked about specific corners within the nodes for a lot of them. So it's pretty detailed. It's pretty reflective of both the major principles that I talked about with regards to the nodes, but also recognizing the existing conditions and potential constraints that some of these nodes have as well. And so I think they really do try to take into account existing conditions with also a future vision. And we do that for every node. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else formal to present. If there's any specific questions, Brent and I are here to answer it. If not, what we'll do is we'll refine the language based on what you heard tonight, clarify it a little more, and then probably come back to you again with some clarified language.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bawala-Holly.
Just a quick question, Mr. Carlisle. If any of the nodes sit near our trails, Troy trails that is, are we going to be incorporating any language within those specific nodes when development happens that they try to make those connections or provide connections for the people to then connect to the trails if they are sitting closer to, or if it's doable?
Yeah, we try to do that on a case-by-case basis. If you recall, this isn't a no, but there's a PUD that there was a concept that was presented before the Planning Commission a number of months ago where we're going to be incorporating trails through that. Again, it's not a node. The quick answer is yes, we really strongly encourage it. We also want to be respectful of the abutting neighborhood, and we want to look at it on a case-by-case basis depending on what's proposed and how that relationship is.
Okay. Okay, thank
Ms.
you.
Karakis.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I think maybe we can try to add that to the overall intent statement, that to the extent that a trail is coming through a node, that the developer would at least consider trying to incorporate that into their design. But actually, I had a question. We were talking about those gateways, and I really liked the concept plans for that. And I think updating the traffic signals and banners are a great idea. Is that something that, that the city has to do that? How does that work? We ask the city to pay for new lights and banners. And then also the question is about the artwork and the signs, which might not sit. Maybe it has to encroach on private property. What do? We run space from them, or we ask if we can put a sculpture on their property, or how does that work?
Go ahead and answer the second one.
Most of that work, that public art, and most of it's on private property. I've seen it done in two ways. One is if the city has a program where they say, this is our signage, this is our public art, they go and then they meet with individual property owners at the corner and say, we'd like to incorporate that, would you be accommodating? More times than not, they say yes, because it's a visual appeal and a visual upgrade to their own property. And then the city then usually gets that by an easement or some other means of control. I've also seen it done where as development occurs, so a corner property redevelops, at that point you approach that new developer and you say, we'd like to incorporate this as part of your upgrades, and that's something that they usually, again, will accommodate because, again, it's added bonus to them. So it can work either way. Typically, like I said, most of the time it is in private property, so there has to be some sort of agreement between it's a public-private partnership, really.
Okay, thank you.
So last thing, so long story short, what a lot of communities do is they will have a formal program where they say, this is going to be our official welcome to whatever sign. This is what our public art's going to look like. It's formally adopted by that city. Then they go out and meet with individual property owners to incorporate that into their landscape or design or whatever it may be.
Now the tough question.
Well, I'm just to piggyback on that, so examples in Troy. Cooper's Hawk has a art piece, and the two restaurants and the strip center just on the other side of the I-75 on the north side. Carrabba's and Bonefish. There's a sculpture there. For both of those, we suggested, or the staff and our planning commission said, hey, it'd be great if you could put public art there, and they put public art there. For both of them, they hired I forget what the term is. They got an artist to commission an artist to do the piece. Some communities ask for space. Can you give us a space? And the community pays for the artist, or there's a nonprofit that pays for the commissions with an artist to do a piece or whatever. So there's different ways to do that. But the signage, another example in Troy, the Petrozello's, there's a PUD there, and there's a Welcome to Troy sign on that property. That was part of a PUD where they agreed to let the city of Troy use their property for the signage. So, they're just trying to think of some examples in the city. Traffic lights. So obviously someone's got to pay for it. South Boulevard, I believe, is a road commission road. So those are road commission traffic signals. So there would have to be a partnership with the road commission. We'd have to iron out the details in terms of who pays for what, when, maybe it's when the traffic lights are need to be replaced. We've got to iron out the details in terms of who pays for it. Now, for some developments, for example, like really significant PUDs, mixed-use PUDs, where there's significant traffic and we have to add new lights, and in situations like that, the responsibility would be on the developer, and that would be an opportunity to get new lights and the quality lights that we're looking for, because the developer's creating the need for the traffic signal, as an example. So it's kind of case-by-case basis, depending on the scale and scope of the project, who owns the street, there's a lot of balls in the air. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it did. It helped. Thank you.
It's trying to answer I don't have a specific project to really zero in on, but it's a policy document, and we can put language in there that addresses your question.
Okay.
Any other questions from members of the commission? Mr. Krent.
Quick comment. I really appreciate the work Ben did and his staff on the gateway entrance areas. The street lighting itself should be unique to Troy. I know Clarkston has their own unique street lighting. There's other cities around that have unique street lighting. And so when you drive into that city, oh, I must be here because I recognize that light. That simple thing, like a street light, if it's done well, and of course, right across the whole gateway roads, that would be, it would be a welcome to Troy. I thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments?
Solar-powered lights, for sure. That's one. Solar-powered lights, yeah. Energy-conscious city.
That's a great
Yeah.
Any questions about any specific nodes other than the ones that Ms. Malahala asked about? The only question I have is, and I'm not sure where this hung, Mr. Hudson was concerned about the 10% number. Do we have a direction on how we're going to deal with that 10%?
Can I punt this and bring it back based
Okay.
on the conversation we had after with some nodes need to consider? So I'd like to take some time with that and come back with something.
All right.
I think I want to add some language to be a little softer in how we deal with specific nodes.
Okay, good. Anything else? So if any individual members of the commission want to send some suggested language, should they send it to you or to Mr. Savinet, or how do you want to do that?
Both.
Both of you? Okay.
Both?
Send it to Ben, me, and copy Ben.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Notice I went in the line above.
You're important, more important.
Well, unless there's nothing else, we are finished with that discussion, and it'll come back again to us eventually, so. Yes, Mr. Carlisle.
Can I give a quick update on what the next steps are?
Sure.
Okay, so the other big section that we want to update is the demographics section. Census data still is not complete, and so we are kind of working through it piecemeal, waiting for that to be finalized and come to fruition. So that should be coming hopefully shortly. Again, there's no set, we're having trouble getting a set timetable from the U.S. Census Bureau when that's going to be done. In addition, we are doing what we call a refreshing of the document. So we are kind of updating fonts and colors and just making it look a little more fresher than what it looked like before. How the state statute works is that we will bring a complete document to this commission, and at which point you feel comfortable, you will then be asked to send a recommendation to the city council to release the master plan for public review. That then kicks off, once City Council releases it for public review, that then kicks off a 63-day public review period where the master plan, a copy of the master plan is sent to adjacent municipalities, sent to other taxing jurisdictions, sent to the railroads, sent to other utilities, sent to the state, the county, et cetera. That allows that public review period where those entities can review the document and then send comments back to this commission for their consideration. Once that 63-day period ends, you may hold, or you're required by ordinance or by state statute to hold a public hearing. The Planning Commission is the body that holds the public hearing for the master plan. If you receive comments during that 63-day period, you can consider them and take them under advisement. You are not required to make any changes based on them, but you should consider them whether or not you want to or not. Once you hold the public hearing, then you will make a recommendation to the City Council for adoption. The City Council has a right to also hold a public hearing. It will be under their determination if they want to or not. But then they will either hold a public hearing or not, but then they will take the recommendation from the Planning Commission and adopt the master plan as such. That being said, this is kind of the first in a couple-step process, but I want the Planning Commission to feel very comfortable that we will not ask you to have the release for public review until you feel comfortable with the document that's going forward. Thank you.
Anything else from the commission? All right, thank you, Mr. Carlisle. And next on the agenda are public comments for items on the agenda. So the one member of the public that's here, you can come and speak to us either on the neighborhood nodes or on any other issue that you'd like to speak to us on. So come on up. Yes, tell us your name and then also make sure you fill out your name and address on the sheet there.
I'm Wei. I live up on South End, Livernois. I was wondering if the Planning Commission has a plan to use shared use paths or like bike lanes to connect the nodes. Like I bike down here and I had to cross the road with no crosswalk in the middle of Livernois, and if you're like a family or a kid and you want to like go like 2 nodes over, like is there any language that sort of encourages that? And the second part of that is kind of like, in some of the renderings, I noticed that a lot of the developments were still like, more than half of it was parking, and I know you need parking, but is there any way to like be more flexible for parking, like trade parking for, say, encouraging a developer to build a sidewalk or a shared use path or something like that. I don't know, I feel like it would help to serve, it would serve locals better with like a pedestrian or a bicycle path rather than like a drive-through that would just serve people, coming through and all that sort of thing. That's pretty much it.
Okay. After you have your seat, we'll respond to your inquiry. Wait, let you finish filling out your address on there. Some good suggestions and comments here. Thank you for your input. Appreciate it.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, Wei, but I think you participated in one of the neighborhood node walk and talks. You were Square Lake and Livernois, I believe. We chatted for quite some time during the walk and talk. So people are paying attention. That's awesome.
Good. Any specific response to his questions?
We have a 5-year Parks and Recreation Master Plan that does contemplate pathways. There's not a specific plan to connect all the nodes via pathways at this time. We recognize the importance of shared use trails. Stay tuned. I mean, it's a process. It's a process.
Yes, Mr. Carlisle.
And the gentleman made a very good point about parking and the concept plans. That was based on the reality of our current zoning ordinance, which requires so much parking for the uses. So we didn't want to present a concept plan that was unrealistic to current zoning requirements. If we amend the zoning ordinance requirements to reduce parking, we can amend the graphics to represent that, but we didn't want to put forth a false expectation that's not consistent with what our zoning is, at least in the foreseeable future with regards to parking.
And I don't want to open up a whole can of worms here, but so we within the last decade or so, we did examine our parking standards, and we ended up reducing a number of our parking requirements. We also allow for shared use parking. We allow for land-based parking. We allow for parking reductions. The Planning Commission has that authority administratively as part of site plan review to reduce parking. So we want the sites right parked. Ideally, on the busiest day, there should be no parking spaces available, but at the same time, no one parking on residential streets. So it's finding that balance. I mean, if you look at what's happening nationally, some communities are starting to look at eliminating parking, suburban communities, eliminating parking or significantly reducing parking and letting people provide their parking for their businesses, apartments, et cetera, on residential streets. I don't think we're there yet in Troy. I'm pretty confident of that. I'm certainly not going to sit here and suggest that that's what we want to do. But the goal, and I think the Planning Commission is in lockstep with Wei. I think we want things right parked, but we don't want to be naive. So scientifically, we have to get a scientific study that it's going to work. Our engineering department and consultant have to review it and agree, and then the Planning Commission ultimately has to agree. So I think we all want the same thing. We don't want mass, vacant fields of asphalt parking.
And no one else is in the audience, so I assume there's no other opportunity for public comment. So I will now return it to the Planning Commission for Planning Commission comment, and I'll start with Mr. Carlisle if he has anything. And I know Mr. Savina has something to tell us.
Yeah, July 12th, we have a scheduled Planning Commission meeting. It's the Tuesday after the 4th of July week, which is a short week for many of us. Unfortunately, I've scheduled a vacation on that day. Mr. Carlisle scheduled a vacation that day, and Julie Dufresne has a conflict that night. So we would like to cancel that meeting, and I predict with 100% certainty it's going to be a beautiful 80-degree night, and everyone's going to have an awesome Tuesday evening away from the Planning Commission. I guarantee it.
We'll count on that guarantee. So, Mr. Motstein, welcome to the meeting tonight. Do you have any comments you'd like to share with us?
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Mr. Tagle.
Yeah, I want to thank the subcommittee, you guys did a great job. I appreciate your efforts, the time you spent on it, and Ben, your office did a nice job putting it all together, and of course, our fearless leader. Okay, guys. That's it. Thank you.
Ms. Bawala,
I'm just going to echo what Mr. Tagle said. Thank you for spending that time and energy in putting together such a thought-out, well-defined plan. So thank you, Ben and Brent, too.
Ms. Paracas.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the gentleman who spoke about that. I want to make sure that I think his point really also is that if we create the paths, then it does reduce the number of parking spaces, at least for part of the year when we're able to bike. So I do think that we should try to add and incorporate that language into the intent statement, that's a goal for the city, because we're trying to do this pathway, so I'd like to be consistent with it.
Good idea.
And just follow up on those 2 points our resident speaker talked about. One is the pathways. I served on 2 of the Troy Trails committees. Were you on that one too? No, okay. And it was, we've been doing this for over 20 years. I was on the Parks and Rec Board at the time, and it was the #1 item. I think like 80% of the respondents wanted more trails and pathways. So the city's been well aware for at least 2 decades that this is one of the high priorities in everything we do. The other thing is when roads get developed, like say Rochester Road's going to be widened, at a certain point, another area of it, to work with the county or the state to, and I-75, we were talking about putting a bike path along I-75 when that was being redeveloped. That didn't go anywhere. But the point I'm getting at is it's on the conscience of all the people, decision makers in the city, including our city manager, to incorporate pathways when we can and encourage it with the other government agencies like the county or the state to make sure we get our share of pathways in their plans that go through Troy. The other thing is the parking. Yes, because we do have an annual Michigan Association of Planners conference. One of the speakers, I'm guessing it was probably at least 6 or 7 years ago, talked about the advent of both shared rides like Uber and other services, and the advent of it'll be eventually autonomous vehicles to the point where you can just call on your phone, I want a ride from here to there, and then a vehicle shows up and drops you off. What it resulted in, that speaker on that particular item gave a specific project, and I can't remember what city it was in, but some city was going to issue a 30-year bond for a municipal parking structure. And after they reviewed the use in 30 years from now, they found that they really only needed about 25% of the parking spaces in 30 years from now, because of the advent of autonomous vehicles and, again, shared driving, et cetera. So I think it's on the focus of a lot of planners. They know that. And we have, over the course of at least the last decade, utilized some of our excess, not necessarily excess parking, but parking that we felt for the future would be an excess parking. So we're addressing both of those issues. Just want to let you know.
Nothing for me.
Mr. Hudson?
Many years ago, when we had the old master plan, Brent and I think Ben, your dad, said we should start reviewing that and make some amendments. I think Mr. Tagle and I were probably the only ones presently, maybe Mr. Krent, two of us. I remember.
You guys are, a couple decades.
It was a rugged process. We were relearning and applying whole new ideas. It took a long time, and I felt a pretty good job was done at that time. But now, with Ben and Brent and this subcommittee, it was like we had a 1948 Ford 12 years ago, and now we've got a big Ford Mustang raring to go. You've done a great job, and it makes it so much easier on us when you take the time to clear out all the rubble and other debris that's in this. and focused on these nodes. I think you've done a great job. My commending to you.
Mr. Beekner.
I get to follow that. You guys had said along the way that there's some educational opportunities for conferences. Is that out there yet? I heard fall.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Krent sent me an email a few weeks ago reminding me that there's already information online for the MAP conference. So it's I don't have the dates memorized.
October, but
It's October this year. It's on Mackinac Island. What I was going to do this week was send an email kind of explaining, giving you some background information, what the dates are, and asking for basically a show of hands of who would be interested in attending. For the newer members who haven't done the Citizen Planner course, I would want to give them priority because I think it's important to offer the opportunity for those members to be trained under the Citizen Planners course. It's a really effective training, but that will be in the email. So I'll send that out and ask everyone to respond, thumbs up or thumbs down if there's interest. If good problem to have, if there's a budget, so there's only so much money there. So a good problem to have is all 9 members say, yeah, I want to go. Then we're going to have to figure out, who gets to go and who maybe goes next year. But we'll worry about that once we get a response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Zarnecki, anything from you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. I'm not sure, because Mr. Savant mentioned a conflict with the July meeting, if we should be voting on canceling that meeting. It's just a question.
Do we normally vote on that, or is that something that just that you make the decision?
We certainly can if the Planning Commission has no issue with it. Ms. Zarnecki raises a very good point. We certainly can.
Would someone like to make a motion to cancel the July 12th meeting?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
We'll give Mr. Faison the motion and Mr. Krent the second, so on that one. Any discussion on canceling that meeting?
Could the motion be that due to scheduling conflicts of staff and the consultant?
That's appropriate to include in that motion, so.
Okay.
Ready for the roll call?
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Manola Hawley.
Yes.
Ms. Parakis.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Beekner.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Zarnecki, for bringing that to our attention.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to report?
Oh, no. thank you.
Okay. I was just going to mention, I'm glad the gentleman came and talked to us about the importance of providing opportunities for people to get around our city without a car. I know in my personal situation, I have a family member who can't drive, and she's dependent upon sidewalks in the city to get around, either walking or riding her bicycle. So I know that's important in our family, but I'm sure there's a lot of families in this city that are in a similar situation. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And with that, we are adjourned.